Good evening, everyone at home and the hundreds of people who are in the audience. We're so glad to see all of you. Thank you for coming. It's those who show up that we love. I think you're going to enjoy tonight. Pat has worked long and hard on presenting her story. Oh, yes, and so we're going to get started in a minute, and if you have a phone with you, will you please turn it off so that it won't interrupt Pat, okay? This is Pat Patterson, and she lives in the manor, and she's going to tell you great stories.
Hi, my name is Pat Patterson, Patricia Patterson. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, in the Midwest, yes, in 1929, the year the world looked at me and then crashed with the Great Depression. I am a born-again Christian. I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior when I was 9 years of age. And I think that's the most important thing you need to know about me as a person. My parents taught both of us, my brother and myself, about God and about the Bible, and saw to it that we went to church every Sunday, even in the years of depression when we had no car and we had to use the trolley cars to go a long ways. I lived in Kansas City or in that area all of my life, my early life, before marriage. In my elementary school, it was of interest perhaps, there were 3 grades in every classroom. I was in 6th grade, and there was a 7th grade group and an 8th grade group in the same room with me, and the teacher had to manage those things. It was a very difficult job for them, I'm sure, but they did a good job, and they did it wonderfully. I went to a high school that was 8 miles from where I lived, which meant I had to ride a school bus 8 miles over to school and 8 miles back. It was necessary to ride that, and twice a day. I learned later that Harry Truman's nephews were in the same school with me. I never knew them because they were upperclassmen, you know, and they don't have anything to do with the lower class. Yes. And the fact that there were only 28 members in my graduating class tells you something about the school I went to. I met my future husband, Jack Patterson, my first day of college, and we were married the day I got my bachelor's degree. So it took me 4 years to get him. When I began college, we were located in Cleveland, Tennessee, and then the other 3 years we were upgraded into a university and moved to Greenville, South Carolina. My husband, Jack, had a very difficult young childhood. His biological father, who was born in Germany, died when Jack was less than 6 months old. We met his biological mother many, many years later, and she said the worst day of her life was the day she had to give up 4 children for adoption. She said, I had a choice, giving them up or watching them starve, because she had no income whatsoever. And he was taken by a family named Smith, who already had 1 child, and in about 2 more years, Mr. Smith died, and Mrs. Smith only could keep 1 child. She did not have a big enough income, so she kept the homegrown child and put Jack in an orphanage in Tucson, Arizona, and that's where the Pattersons found him. All of this happened before he was 4 years of age. So you know what he went through, pretty much. After we were married, we moved to the Fort Worth, Texas area. where Jack was studying for to become a Baptist minister. He had begun his studies in pre-med and went at least 2 years getting pre-med subjects. But he did change and was, when I married him, he was going to be a minister. In 1956, we went to San Jose, Costa Rica, in Central America, to learn Spanish, since everything we were going to do had to be in Spanish. At that point in time, we had 3 children, and we had the first semester we had a grammar class where an American teacher taught us grammar through English. But after that, everything was 3 people to a class and a teacher who refused to speak English. So you either learned Spanish or you just gave up. In 1956, we went to San Jose, Costa Rica, in Central America, and that's where the language school was. A lot of different missionary groups, different church groups had people there. It was a very interesting time and lasted almost a year. After that year, we returned to the States to say goodbye to our family and pack up our household goods. We now had 4 children after we finished language school. As we were traveling from Texas toward New York, stopping off in Kansas City to say goodbye, the police stopped us on the highway and told my husband that his father had had a heart attack. And since he was the only member of the family except the parents, he headed here to Virginia. That was in Colonial Heights, where Dad Patterson had been a pastor. He did have a heart attack, and he was, he had one of those near-death incidents, and it was very interesting. He came back and told us, having seen his mother in heaven, but never close enough to talk to her. Since we had missed our sailing date, we had to wait for several months to get another one because they were all booked in the winter months. So we had, during that time, Jack accepted the position as interim pastor in Matoaca Baptist Church. That's where Dad Patterson had been. In fact, he was in the pulpit when he had his heart attack, but he managed to cover up and get down to the front row without upsetting everything. But anyway, Jack took that over, and while we were waiting for a shipping date, we lived in Matoaca in the parsonage and were very happy there, really. On the very last day, before we were to head for New York, our suitcases, everything was down at the train station. And our only son at that point crossed the busy street in front of the house where we were staying, and he was hit by a car on his head. The doctors at first were a little bit leery, did not think he would survive, and then thought maybe he'd be a vegetable. But God got him through that, and after several weeks, he was well enough for us to proceed to Columbia. We traveled by freighter. It wasn't a cruise ship. It was definitely a freighter. And at that point, with 4 children, the freighter that they put us on did not have any walls or sides to the ship. There was just a draped chain around the outside of the ship. And you can imagine, we didn't go outside of our cabins without hanging on to the 4 children. But we were very grateful that God had healed our son enough that everything would go ahead as planned. We served in Colombia for 4 years, teaching and pastoring. Now, I didn't pastor, I don't mean to imply that. I did help teach. We were located in a seminary there in Cali, Colombia. That's C-A-L-I, Colombia. And we were teaching different students from different countries, all through Central America and South America. They came to the seminary there in Cali, and we were able to teach and preach. Jack preached or taught theology, and also, by the way, he taught Greek through Spanish. Now, when we first started language school, he had Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. Nothing, that was translatable or easily put into Spanish. And now he was teaching in Spanish the Greek, and that boggles my mind anyhow. We served there for 4 years. By the way, he was also a pastor. We were also on multiple committees. You might be interested to know that John Riddle, who is a resident here in Covenant Woods, his father used to take Jack and me fishing because they lived in one of the cities there in Colombia. And when we would go there for meetings, his father would take us out on a fishing trip, which was wonderful. By the way, we were there about 4 years, teaching and pastoring. And when the time came for our year of furlough, we would have 4 years on the field and then a year of furlough. We decided to go to Scotland to enable my husband to go to the University of Edinburgh, which is a Scottish Presbyterian school, and get his second doctorate. My mother-in-law, his mother, was, of course, alone at that point, so she decided to go with us and live in Scotland that year, which was a big help. It meant that she would keep the youngest child, who was too young to go to school, while Jack and I both went to school. And it was a terrific help. It meant also that for the first time she'd get acquainted with her grandchildren, so that was a real plus. We did live in the capital city there in Edinburgh and had a lovely time. They treated us so nicely. We were used to being in Colombia where any person you met would steal you blind if you didn't watch out for them. And everybody in Edinburgh, somebody found a little girl's purse with a $1 bill in it, and they went all over Edinburgh looking for what American family is here. So they were just super to us. Mother Patterson died toward the end of that year, which complicated things a bit, but we were able to bring her ashes back and have a funeral here in Virginia, in Colonial Heights, where her husband had been pastor for so long. It was a very interesting time when we were able to get them together. Excuse me. I have skipped something here, but that's okay. We got back from Scotland, went back to Colombia, and were down there for another 4 years. My husband, of course, was teaching. I was teaching, and it was a wonderful time for us. We feel like God was good to us, and he took care of our children, too. We did serve in Colombia for another 4 years. And then when we got to the place where we were going to go back to the States, we went to, let's see, oh yes, we went to Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm sorry. I had a glitch there, and had our furlough year. And it was during that year that we decided that it would be for the benefit of our children to move back to the States and go to public schools here. Most the girls were having a ball, but our son, who had been hit by the car, was struggling. But he did all of his school, and he graduated all right from high school. That's when we came to the Richmond area after the year in Charlotte. And it was a wonderful time for us. We were let's see, we came to the Richmond area after that furlough year in Charlotte, and my husband went as pastor to Hatcher Memorial Baptist Church in the lakeside area of Richmond. We were there for 16 years and really enjoyed it. It was a good time for us. Our children enjoyed the school setup. And by the way, we had 2 more children who were born in South America that other 4 years. They both had dual citizenship, and that was an interesting thing. Neither of them has ever been back at that point or since then. It was good to have that opportunity. When we came to the Richmond area, and we're here, like I said, for 16 years. And then Jack accepted a church back in Fort Worth, Texas. But somehow we missed Virginia. Even though neither of us were originally from Virginia, we did miss the Virginia area. And my husband went to serve as a helper and guide. I don't know. It's like superintendent or bishop or whatever. Baptists don't give them that big a title. But that's okay too. And he had 75 churches that were from Williamsburg down to Hampton. Hampton. So we did like that. He was in that position for 10 years with 75 churches to look after. I taught school during that time, public school, taught Spanish and French. With 6 kids, you need the extra income. But that's okay too. I enjoyed it and was glad to do it. I did teach there in Henrico and in Hermitage, both different times. And our kids went to school. 3 of our children graduated from Hermitage, 3 from Henrico, because we moved during the time, and also they moved the lines. So some of you may have experienced that. We were we lived in Newport News and Hampton during those 10 years. At the end of the 10 years, it was time for Jack to retire. But that was a joke. He did retire from the 75 churches, but we moved our place of work up to the Middle Peninsula, and he only had 25 churches then, just nothing to do. Yeah. I did not teach when we were doing that. I became Jack's secretary, which I enjoyed tremendously. It's nice to be able to work together, and that was the way it was. it was in 2005 that our daughter, well, we wanted to move up here and not live in Newport News longer. We had 3 daughters up here at that point in time. Since then, 2 of our daughters have died, have gone to heaven. But they both knew the Lord, and I know they're okay, and they're with their dad. So that's an encouraging thing. After, let's see, well, January 2012? Yeah. Well, up till that point. We moved here to Mechanicsville in '05. Our daughter, one of our daughters who lived here, said, "Mom, if either of you got sick, I couldn't come help you." So we moved up here, up near Walnut Grove Baptist Church. I've forgotten the name of the group of houses where we were, off of Cold Harbor Road. So we lived there, and then we moved to here to Covenant Woods in January of 2012. Jack moved into healthcare, and I moved into an apartment. He lived for 6 weeks after that, but I felt like it was the kindest thing God could do for him. It was to let him go, because there were 2 things he wanted to do, and he couldn't do either one. He couldn't preach, and he couldn't go home. So he wasn't a happy camper. Since that time, the two of our daughters have died. One who lived in South Richmond, I can't think of the name of the section, and one who was here in Mechanicsville, near us. I'm trying to remember what we did after that. Not
After Jack died.
yeah, after he died. Well, I just settled down in Covenant Woods. I have been very grateful for the care here, and mostly for the people who live here. I think some of the most wonderful people I've ever met are here in Covenant Woods. All walks of life and from different places. I did skip over one thing about what Jack was doing. After we came to Richmond and he took the pastorate at Hatcher Memorial, he was on what we call the Foreign Mission Board back then. It's now the International Mission Board. And he was chairman of that, which meant he was the one helping the board and all of its members and leaders. And they asked him to take a trip around the world to visit many of the missionaries and, advise them or help them or encourage them. And I hocked everything I had and went with him, which means that I've been to 51 different countries, which is amazing to me. He, of course, was in many more because he made several trips, but I was so glad to have that chance to go. Of course, we lived in Scotland one year, and while we were there, we went to England and Wales and France and Germany and Spain, just multiple, and Portugal. I think we went to Portugal too, Italy. A lot of the different, we even went to Egypt. Now, that's the only country in Africa that I got to. We were in India, many of the different countries where we have missionaries. And it was marvelous for me to have that opportunity. We came back after that trip. Of course, he made several trips. I was teaching a lot of the time and thankful for the income. But when we moved here to Mechanicsville, it was a very interesting time for us. When we came back to the States from South America, I'll tell you this, Jack asked me, well, where would you like to live? In Missouri, where you're from, in Virginia, where he had lived after being a middle schooler, or Texas, where our first 4 children were born. And my choice was Virginia. I really like it here, and I think it's a wonderful place to live. It seems to me that this is a good place to live. There are so many wonderful things here, and especially, as I said before, the people. And a lot of the staff members, too, are fine and wonderful people. And I feel like it is a gift to my children that they don't have to worry about me. They know Mom's okay, and she'll be taken care of no matter what happens. Okay.
Are you finished?
Yes.
Well, there is one important thing I want to tell you about. We were in here in the Commons shortly after I arrived, and we were singing. I don't know why, but we were. And Pat was sitting. I knew who Pat Patterson was, but I had never met her. So I was sitting there, and she was singing, and I heard this beautiful voice, and it was Pat. And I thought to myself, I just want to know her, because anyone with a voice that beautiful should be known. And that's when I knew that I was going to like you.
Thank you. That's
Very,
nice of
very
you.
much.
Sacred music was my major in college.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that came in handy as a pastor's wife, even though I hadn't expected to marry a preacher. My grandfather was a preacher. My father-in-law he was Presbyterian. My father-in-law was a Baptist pastor. My husband was a Baptist pastor. My brother was an Episcopalian pastor. And I had no plans for marrying a pastor. But, you know, the best laid plans can sometimes fool you.
And I loved the fact that when I started talking to Pat a little bit, the very first thing she said to me was, I was married to a pastor. You did. I don't know if you remember that, but you did. Pat, you have had such an interesting life living in so many different parts of the world.
God
And we're
has been
glad
good.
you wound up here with us.
Yes, I am too. God's been very good to me and to my family.
Put your microphone up.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't expect to be a pastor's wife, but it's good. And I'm glad that I had to teach English and Spanish in the high schools, because that I've taught French, which was my minor, and taught Spanish in most of the high schools. And that gave me something that was very interesting. And the things that I had picked up along the way, like piano, I was never a great pianist, but when a church needs a pianist, and the pastor's wife step in. If you need an organist, pastor's wife steps in. Isn't that right? If you need a janitor, guess who gets to do it? But that's all right, too. And we lived 8 years, like I said, in Lakeside, then 8 years in Chamberlain, and then, 10 years or more down in Newport News and Hampton. But I like Virginia, and I feel like this is pretty much home. And some wonderful people are here in Virginia.
Well, we all want to say thank you to you for sharing your life with us for tonight. And now we know a little bit more about you, and that feels good.
Thank you.
For all of us.
I forgot my total of foreign countries where I went is 51, And my husband and I both have been in 51 states. That's a rarity, I think, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Things I never expected to be able to do, God opened the door, and I'm very thankful.
You could have written a book.
I don't stay concentrated that long anymore.
You could have talked it to somebody.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you again. I'm so glad you were here to let everybody know about your life and the exciting parts of it, and
Thank you.
probably sometimes a little bit scary, but
Yes,
it was still a wonderful life. It continues to be, too.
thank you. I do have one daughter still here, lives in Mechanicsville. I have a son in Newport News, and I have a son and a daughter in Waco, Texas. I don't get to see them as often as I'd like.
Yeah.
And 6 grandchildren and 4.5 greats. I'm expecting my first great-granddaughter this month, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for letting me do this.
I'm so glad you did. I knew you would do a great job.
Well, you're very kind. God has been so good to me, and I really appreciate it. I was told when I was a teenager, well, I'll back up one step. My junior year in high school, I spent from January to August flat on my back. I could not even sit up, much less get up. And they told me I would probably be at least a semi-invalid all my life and never able to have children.
You fooled them.
I have 6 children. Wonderful. And I mean, really, considering my age, I'm in good health. So I really thank God for that.
Well, he had a different plan.
That's right. He knew what was going to happen, and the doctors didn't. I don't hold it against the doctors. They were trying to help me. But, you know, when you lie flat on your back as a teenager, and remember there was no TV, you all know that. I had a radio beside the bed, and I could tell you anything on any station in Kansas City. But no TV, no entertainment whatsoever. But I survived. God is good.
He had work for you to do.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for the
And
opportunity.
thank you all for being here. We appreciate those of you who come in person because it makes it so much easier to talk to real people than to talk
That's
to the
right.
television set. So thank you all, and good night.